Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Untrivial podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. My guest today is Kelley Daring. She is an entrepreneur, podcaster, content creator, and advocate for women's rights. She has amassed over 100,000 followers on TikTok, where she shares the stories of women's lived experiences. This is to challenge the socially acceptable ideals of motherhood and marriage, and her aim is to inform and empower women to consider roles other than those traditionally prescribed by society. Today, we discuss women's decision to be child-free, stories of those who share they regret parenthood, and why shedding light on these topics is so important for women to make informed choices. I loved this conversation with Kelley. I think it's so important that women make the best choices for them. Obviously, I've chosen to have children. That doesn't mean I think everyone should. And I think this conversation and Kelley's stories are really, really important. It also made me wonder, if society was shaped differently and mothers had more community support, equitable partnerships, etc., if the choice to be child-free would be made the same amount or what that would look like. It was a really interesting conversation, and I really hope you guys enjoy her podcast titled Call Her Daring, where she continues to share women's stories and has in-depth conversations about women's issues, can be found on Apple and Spotify. You can also find her on TikTok at Kelley Daring, KelleyDaring. Now, let's get into the episode. Kelley Daring, welcome to the Untrivial podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to speak with you today because I think the conversation around being child-free and being child-free by choice is so important and something that's just really starting to become more popular to speak about openly. And so I wanted to understand, what's your background and how did you get into the space of discussing child-free by choice on TikTok or regretful parenting on TikTok?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Being child-free by choice has always been a topic that interests me. And for about a year or two, I was on TikTok mostly as a consumer. So I would just watch the videos. I made a handful of videos, but I really wasn't active in creating content. And then one day, a few months ago, a video came up on my For You page, and it was a woman, and she was asking, when did you, as a child-free by choice woman, first start to realize that you didn't want children? And I saw that video, and I thought instantly, like, I can answer this without even thinking. I know the answer to this question. So I did answer that question. I stitched the video, and I answered that question. And that video went viral. And I think right now it's got like 1.1 million views. And so that's
Wow.
really how I started this whole conversation, was all the comments and messages that I got from that video. I just started engaging with those people, and it kind of snowballed from there.
That is so interesting. And then for those of us who might not know the story, what was the moment that you knew that you wanted to be child-free?
Well, I first started to realize that I might not want children when I was about 14 years old, and I worked in my family's restaurant. And what happened was I would observe moms with their children in the restaurant. And what I saw was that most of the moms looked stressed out, and they looked exhausted, and they looked frustrated. And if the dads were with them, then I oftentimes saw that the dads weren't doing as much work to parent the children as the moms were. And so
Mm.
that really was the moment that I started considering that motherhood might not be for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard people say, like, I don't know if I want motherhood. I would definitely take fatherhood if I
Yes.
could. And
I've
that's
heard
such
that
a
as
good
well, and I
point.
completely understand that sentiment. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, we're hearing more and more that even millennial dads are spending like 3 times more time with their kids, and that's amazing. That's great. But do you still feel like there is an imbalance, or are you hearing from people that imbalance still exists in their marriages and in their households?
That imbalance absolutely still exists. So I received hundreds of messages and thousands of comments from women telling me their stories of their marriages and their experiences as mothers. And without a doubt, there is still an imbalance between the amount of work that women do in the household and raising the children and the amount of work that men do in those areas. So even though it's great that we've got these millennial dads spending more time with their kids than boomer dads did, that's great. That's a step in the right direction, but it's still nowhere close to equal.
So for those who don't know, what is your series now on TikTok? Like, tell us a little bit about the Regretful Parenting series.
Yeah, the Regretful Parent series started when I started responding to those comments on my child-free initial post. And in one of my videos, I addressed the fact that you could love your children more than anything, but you could also regret having children. And that spawned a lot of comments and a lot of conversation. And from there, I introduced a couple of stories from an online forum that I knew about. And these stories were about being a regretful parent. And it was mothers anonymously sharing their experience of regretting motherhood. And so I started sharing those stories, and I shared a couple from that online forum. I kept those people anonymous. And once I did that, I got hundreds of messages from moms who wanted to share their story and their experience of being regretful in motherhood. So yeah, so now I think we're on part like 25, I think. So there's 25 parts to the Regretful Parents series, and I've got probably 30 more videos that are already recorded that I'm just waiting to share. So it's a successful
Wow.
series for sure.
Yeah, and so interesting because I would feel as though if you were a mom and you felt that way, it's not quote unquote okay to talk about in society. Like there would probably be a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of feelings of just like, oh my God, I can't believe I feel this way, and like self blame around that conversation that you're probably seeing a whole nother side of motherhood that a lot of people will never hear about or never get exposed to because it almost feels like we can't.
Exactly. Yeah, we are definitely not encouraged to tell the truth about motherhood. Society, the media, it all sugarcoats motherhood. It paints it as this, rainbow and unicorns experience. And we silence the women that want to tell us otherwise. In society, if a woman were to talk about the fact that she regrets motherhood, she would be silenced and she would be ostracized. And some people would call her a monster. And so
Hmm.
people know this, and that's why they don't talk about their stories of regret. And when they do it anonymously online where nobody ever has to know their identity.
Yeah. I think it's getting better, and I'd love to know your thoughts because at least with TikTok, at least with social media, there are people who are becoming more vulnerable, who can like non-anonymously share, this is really hard, or I'm really struggling with maybe postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. There's more conversation around some of these downsides, but you're right. I don't think it's anywhere near the regret side. Like, I don't think anyone's prepared to say that with their full chest. What do
It's
you
not.
think?
Yeah, it's so true. And even when you do talk about the hardships, it is expected that is paired with your declaration of undying love for your children. And of course, we want mothers and fathers to feel an undying love for their children, but so often women can't tell the whole truth because it's expected that they sugarcoat it. So the whole truth can never be spoken in those situations.
And it's really interesting because if we don't get the whole truth, if people who are thinking about having children or are considering that for their future don't know what they're getting into, we just might perpetuate the problem. And people who maybe if they had learned from a mother in a similar situation or with a similar dynamic with their partner that actually that might not be the best choice for XYZ, they're not going to be able to make that informed choice if we don't have people kind of sharing this side of motherhood that can be really, really hard.
Yeah, you nailed it. That is the number one goal with my Regretful Parent series is to inform and educate women, especially young women, about the realities because without that information, they can't make intentional choices. And we can't blame them. You can't blame a regretful mother who had no idea about the realities of motherhood before she went into it because we never talk about it.
Hmm. What's an example of a story that you've heard? Like, what led to their decision to feel that regret, or what about their situation made them feel regretful?
So it's every story is different. And I want to preface this by saying that a lot of times people want to blame regret on circumstances, on, whether, you might not make enough money to support your child, or you may have selected the wrong partner to have a child with. Your children may be young and they expect that it's going to get better when they get older. So oftentimes we try to write off regret as just a circumstantial effect. But true regret does exist in parenthood, and we have to acknowledge that. And so there is no like one common story that I'm finding. I can tell you there are contributors like not being financially sound, but not having a supportive partner, not having a loving partner, being in an abusive situation. All of those things definitely contribute to leading to regret. But I've also had stories from women who have like the fairy tale. They have the picture on the
Mm.
surface. They've got the picture perfect life. They've got the finances. They've got the career. They've got the loving, supportive partner. They've got the village. They've got everything that they should need to be happy in motherhood, and yet they're not. So it's different for everyone.
Yeah, and everyone is so unique and so different that it's hard to say this life path, and it is a huge life change. You completely change your entire life and flip it upside down the minute you become a mom. To think that we all will love that humongous change, I think is naive, and I think that's what
Completely.
society tries to tell us. But why do you think there's such a resistance or judgment to normalizing people who don't wanna have kids? Like, why is there such a pushback on this child-free movement, do you think?
I My personal belief is that it stems from the fact that we live in a capitalist patriarchal system, and that system benefits from and is sustained by women having children. And for women to continue to want to have children, they have to believe that it's the best and most important thing that they can do in their life. And so that's the message we receive from society and from media from the time we are born. Like we are getting those messages from the time we were born. When we are given as little toddlers, when we're given baby dolls to play with, we
Mm.
are being taught to mother from such a young age. So I think it's the systems in place that make it impossible or make it very difficult to normalize not wanting children as women.
Mhm. And I think even with the progress of equality and the progress of just choice overall, especially for women, it's like, of course, this was gonna come into the conversation at some point because I think, our grandmothers and their mothers, they didn't even really have a choice. The expectation is you are a stay-at-home mom and you're a mom, and, like, there was no career for you to have. There was no community outside of other mothers for you to have at that time. And there's been such a shift since then.
Yes, I love that shift. And that's so true. I've seen commenters on TikTok and other social media talk about how their grandmothers were so happy. They were content being mothers and grandmothers and wives and what's happened with women nowadays. And I think that's so interesting and so funny and so short-sighted because they weren't necessarily happy. They just didn't have a choice. They did what they
Mhm.
had to do. And now we have a choice. Now we have the opportunity to talk with other women using social media and really start to see all the opportunities that are available to us and really start to see, okay, a child-free by choice life actually is quite appealing. I don't have to have kids, and there are benefits to not having kids, and now I can see both sides of the coin, and I can make an intentional choice about motherhood.
Yeah. I love that you said that too, because, of course, this conversation is not to demonize mothers or say that mothers are making the wrong choice. It's simply talking about the fact that we have a choice now and we
Absolutely.
can make that informed choice. And whether you choose to be a mom, like me, I'm choosing to be a mom, or you choose to not have children,
both of those choices are valid, and everyone should be able to make the choice that suits them and their life and their goals and what they see for themselves in the rest of their life.
Absolutely, that is what I want as well. I do not want to demonize motherhood. I think motherhood is a wonderful thing and it's right for some women, but it's not right for all women. And it's okay to honor that and it's okay to acknowledge that. I do want to be transparent and note that I do have three stepdaughters. So I did decide to be child free by choice, biologically speaking, but I also did decide to be a step parent and my three stepdaughters are all young women. They're 18 to 23, and they are wonderful girls, and they're an important part of my life, and I love them very much. So I do want to be clear. I don't want to misrepresent
Mhm.
myself by saying that I am completely child free by choice because I am not. But that also puts me in a unique position, I think, to understand the child free by choice life as well as the life
Mhm.
of a mother. So I think it puts me in a unique position to have these conversations and to look at both sides without judgment. I know the pros and the cons of both sides.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that there's so many different ways that this can look for people. You can choose to be a mother in a lot of different ways, or you could be a surrogate. Like that's motherhood in its own right and totally different. And like there's so many different ways that you can either be child free in certain respects or a mother in certain respects. Like I know so many people who are aunts, like sisters to a mother, who are so involved in the child rearing process too. And it's like we can also note how broad this caring and this nurturing experience can look, and all the different ways that you can choose to have kind of that autonomy without motherhood as well.
Absolutely. I love that you made that point because I love the role of the aunt or the cool aunt.
Hmm.
Such a fun role, and it's such a great way to be involved with children and get that fulfillment without taking on the responsibility of children yourself if that's not what you want. And everybody benefits in that situation. I think the cool aunt or the aunt benefits, the kids benefit, and then the mom of the kids benefit from that. So I just love that role. My sister has two
Hmm.
children, and I adore them. She lives in New York, I'm in California, so I don't get to see them all the time, but it is such a fun role to be their cool aunt. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. My sister is, I think, choosing to be child free, and she's like ready to be the cool aunt for
Yeah.
my babies. And I'm like, perfect. I get more support. You get to like hold babies, give them snuggles, give them
Yes.
back.
Yes,
And
exactly.
everybody wins.
Everybody
Totally.
does win. I love that.
What are the sorts of reactions that you get from people on TikTok, I would say, or strangers who are seeing you have this conversation, seeing you read off these stories? Are they positive, negative, mixed?
They're mixed for sure. So on TikTok specifically, it's a mixed bag. I would say it's 90 to 95% positive. Most people see the value. Most of my viewers are women. Most of these women do see the value. Some are not comfortable with the conversations and they say so. And I can understand why it's uncomfortable. Still think it's necessary to have the conversations, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And actually, especially because it makes you uncomfortable. And I think it's important to listen to stories from women who live a life that is different than yours. That said, as far as in real life, actually, not many people know that I do this. So, um,
Interesting.
yeah, it's not something that I've shared with a ton of people in my personal life. So if they've come across my TikTok, they know, but I haven't shared this really with anyone. But the people that do know about it, my friends and family that are very close to me, they are supportive. So I think some of the conversations may even make them a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. We work through it.
Oh, that's so interesting. If you don't mind me asking, was being biologically child free something that you always knew about yourself or something that kind of came with time? And I know you mentioned that kind of experience watching mothers and that kind of making a shift for you, but has it gotten more sort of confirmation over time, or have you ever kind of gone back and forth and, been on the fence, if you will, like a lot of women are kind of in their 20s and 30s?
Yeah. I definitely was on the fence. I get stories from women who knew from a very young age that they absolutely did not want children, and that was not me. When I was younger, I thought that I would have children. And again, starting around age 14, when I started observing moms with their kids, the doubt started to creep in. But up until it wasn't until I was around 33 to 35 that I really knew I didn't want to have kids of my own. Prior to that, there was always I was like 75% sure, and then I was 80% sure. It just slowly and steadily grew until the point I just had to recognize, okay, I really don't want kids. And for me, the pros just never outweighed the cons. It always just seemed I would rather regret not having kids than regret having kids. So as I aged from my
Mm.
20s to my early 30s, I just knew that that was more and more clear to me through that decade. And so I finally arrived around 35 with just like, yep, this is it. I know I don't want kids, but I was on the fence and I thought I wanted kids into my 20s. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I appreciate that because the other thing you hear a lot as a young woman is women who say, they don't think they want kids in their early 20s. And then everyone coming to them and saying, oh, you'll change your mind. And the frustration that probably comes along with that. And part of me feels for the people who say that because I was someone who was 21 and I was like, oh, I'm never going to have kids. Just kidding. I did change my mind, but there are plenty of women who don't change their mind. And so, yeah, I just think it's really interesting to constantly be hearing that. And then, just from a societal perspective, be told what you think is not true. You actually don't know what you're talking about your own future, about your own life. And that solidification only really seems valid once you're kind of in your late 30s or early 40s. And even then, people might say, oh, you're going to regret that
yes,
10 years down the line. Like, do you ever have to deal with comments like that? And like, what do you make of them?
absolutely. Yeah. I've dealt with those comments my whole life. Even when I was unsure, I would say, I'm not sure if I want kids. Then I still dealt with those comments. And I know almost all child free by choice women deal with those comments. It's so frustrating and it's so invalidating because,
Hmm.
yes, some women may change their mind and that's okay. It's their right to change their mind. But to be so bold and arrogant to tell someone how they're going to feel, what they're going to think. It's so invalidating. It's so frustrating, and I don't think it's fair that we do it. We never say to women who know that they want kids, "Oh, you're going to change your mind. You won't want kids." I mean, like it seems
Right.
absolutely ridiculous that you would say that, and yet we do
Right.
it in the reverse scenario all the time. And yeah, I really wish that that would end. And I hope that talking about child free by choice and regretful parents, that will start to end. We should not be telling women that they're going to change their mind.
Yeah. Do you think these conversations, like, have you received messages that they've helped women kind of solidify their decision? Or, like, what sorts of feedback are you getting from your target audience, which is people who are younger and kind of in that mode of considering whether they want or, don't want kids?
Messages I've received from women thanking me for creating these series are the whole reason that I keep creating these videos. I have received so many messages from women all ages. I mean, 20-year-olds to 50-year-olds saying how important these messages have been to them and how it has made them feel seen and feel heard. And it's really like what keeps me going. I feel like I'm making a positive impact in the world by having these conversations and by telling these stories. And I absolutely love that women are hearing these experiences and it's changing their life. It's making them feel reaffirmed in their choices, or it's making them feel seen and heard about being a regretful mom. It's so rewarding. Like I can't like verbalize how good it makes me feel to know that I have positively impacted these women's lives.
Hmm. Do you ever get pushback from people being like, you're scaring women or you're going to make them make a choice that they're going to regret later? Like, what do you say to comments like that?
I have gotten a few of those comments. I think it's pretty ridiculous. So it's not often that I even respond to them. Again, I think women know their minds. They know who they are. They know who they want. I don't think a video of mine on TikTok is going to change the course of a woman's life. She's able to think for herself, and she's
Hmm.
going to make decisions about her life for herself. So all I'm doing is putting the information out there. That's all I'm doing. I'm not even offering commentary on these videos, on these stories. I just tell the stories, that's it. And so that information is out there for women to do with it what they want.
Yeah, and I so appreciate that too, because I think if you think about just access to information overall, there is no shortage of information about motherhood, about the joys of motherhood, about the rewards of motherhood. You hear it from almost all moms you talk to or
Yep,
interact with. And so having this little corner of the internet where people are free to say a little bit that contradicts that and but is still their real experience and their real story about motherhood isn't trying to change people's mind. It's just kind of saying, "Hey, there's another side to this coin that might be worth considering maybe for you." And it's still even just a maybe, right?
exactly. Yeah, and it's a safe space for women to tell their stories when there's no other place for them to do that. And I have received comments and messages from women saying, "Why don't you tell the good stories about motherhood as well?" And what you said just said now is the exact reason that I have not shared the good stories of motherhood. You can find that information everywhere. It's everywhere. We're inundated with it all the time. All the benefits of being a mother, of having children. There are many benefits, and it's a wonderful experience. But I think you can find that information absolutely everywhere. So I reserve my space for the other experiences.
I really appreciate that. And I think too, even just watching your series on TikTok and listening to the stories, there's also so much nuance to each situation. And just because you hear, oh, like I had children and I regret it, it doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to regret that too. And oh, just because this person is in the same financial situation as me doesn't mean you're going to regret that too. I think there's so much that you do share about these stories, but there's also so much that we don't know. And like you can still decipher and figure out, like, okay, there's maybe parts of this that I should consider and want to weigh, but there's other parts that might not be relevant to me or my situation, and that's okay too. So I really appreciate that, you're giving context, but we'll never know the whole story. This is a
Exactly.
completely individual life of a mother that we don't even know, right? So,
Exactly, yeah, and the listener is free to take what they want from it.
hmm
Like you said, you can pick the parts that you feel apply to you, apply to your life, might apply to you, and the rest you can leave behind. You take from it what you want. And women have commented and messaged that they had children, but they can still understand these points of view. And that's the whole thing. You don't have to be in the same position to listen to these stories and empathize and see how they could be true, see how they could be possible in another woman's life without it necessarily applying to your own. That's
hmm
storytelling. You can listen to a story about anything and
yeah.
take from it what you want.
Yeah. And I even think that too, like as a mother, say you were a mother who 0% regretted having your children, but hearing someone's story of, whether it's really hard by your perspective or similar, but if they're going through something and you're like, I could absolutely imagine how having kids in that situation would be so much harder or completely different than what I'm experiencing as a mom. And I think that empathy, even if you are someone who knows they want kids, love kids, have kids, you can still hear these stories and really understand a new perspective and a new experience that's different than your own. That's really helpful, even just to help you learn and grow as a person, I think.
Exactly. 100%. You said it perfectly. I could not say it any better. Yes. You can listen to these stories of other women, and yes, they can cause you to feel empathy. They can cause you to understand a life that's not your own, and the struggles that another person goes through. And that's all good. That's all beneficial. We should hear stories from women who live lives that are not like our own.
Hmm. Absolutely. What do you think, based off what you may have learned from getting all of these stories from so many different women all over the world, what do you think it takes to not feel regret? Do you have anything that you maybe have pulled out and said, like, okay, this is maybe how I could avoid it, or this is what I need to have to not get into that situation? Anything at all?
Yes, definitely. And so I've read hundreds of messages from regretful moms, and I would say that from those messages, I have learned that you should absolutely be sure you want children. If you are wishy washy, if you're on the fence, I think there's a greater chance for regret. That doesn't mean if you're wishy washy or on the fence, that doesn't mean you absolutely will regret having children. But I do think that there's a greater chance for regret. If you are not 100% sure you are in for children. If you know you don't want children, then do not be swayed by your partner. Do not be swayed by your parents, your friends, by society. Don't let anyone sway you. You have to stick to your guns because a large majority are women who they knew they didn't want kids, and yet they were swayed by their partner or their parents or all their friends, or it just happened. They never planned it. It just happened, and then they just went with it. And that's a lot of the regret that I'm reading about. What else? I think having all the systems in place, if you are financially stable, if you do have a loving and supportive partner, if you have dealt with any past trauma, if you have communicated with your partner about who's going to do the household labor, who's going to do most of the child rearing, is it going to be split 50-50? Is one of you going to stay home? I think if you've got all of that stuff in place, then you are better positioned to not regret your children. But it's not 100%. There are still women, like I said, that have all of that in place and they still feel regret. But I think it lessens the chances of regret.
Hmm. How big of a role do you think the partner or spouse plays into the feeling of regret?
I think it's pretty big, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have a loving and supportive partner who is willing to pull their weight, that is going to have a huge impact on your experience as a mother and as a wife or a partner, of course. And like I said, there are still women who have said, "I have the best partner, and he's loving and he's supportive and he does everything that a dad and a husband should do, and I still regret having kids." So it helps, but
Hmm.
it doesn't make it 100%.
Yeah, I guess there's no silver bullet, and you just need to
Mm.
be sure of yourself and sure of your decision. And it sounds like have a partner, or if you are choosing to have a partner in this life, who is in the same frame of mind as you. And also, if you want kids, they want kids. And if you don't want children, they don't want children. Because I think that could cause huge, huge problems.
Exactly, it does. And the communication piece, I think so many people just don't communicate with their partners about I think you have to over communicate. You have to talk about every detail. You have to be on the same page about what your expectations are raising kids because it's years, it's 18 plus years, it's for life actually. And if you're
Hmm.
not on the same page, it can go wrong in so many ways.
You also have a series on regretful wives. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I thought that that was important to talk about as well because a lot of the regretful parents videos, the comments would often say, "I don't think this is a case of regretful parenting, or parenthood. I think this is a case of being a regretful wife." And I didn't agree with those comments, and I felt that they invalidated those mothers' feelings of parental regret. However, I thought that it would make a really interesting series because I was seeing a lot of messages that did include marital regret. And in the same vein as motherhood, women are, I don't want to say pushed into marriage, but society expects us to take on the role of wife. And we've been taught that from a very early age. And so often the fairy tale does not line up with reality. So I
Mm.
thought it's important to tell these stories so that, again, we are informing and educating young women as they go into adulthood and make decisions about their life. So, yes, I do share regretful wife stories. I also share non regretful wife stories. So, some of them are positive, some of them are women saying how they have the most loving, supportive partner, and he is their best friend. And they made the best decision by marrying their partner or being with their partner.
Hmm.
So yeah, that series I think is super informative and educational as well.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for someone who maybe they're on the fence right now of marriage or kids and they're considering that big life altering decision? And I know you talked about ways that we can avoid regret, but what would you say to them in terms of like actions they could take or conversations that you think are really important to have?
I've gotten actually messages from people asking my advice on this as well about marriage and kids. And so often they're from really young women, like 21, 22, 23. And to those women, I say, hit pause, give it 5 years. I want you to not think about marriage or
Hmm.
children for 5 years. I want you to go to school, build a career, travel, save money, have fun, try out different partners. And then 5 years from now, you sit down and you look at who you are, what you want your life to be, and get really honest with yourself. And that's when you can start determining, do I want children? Do I want to be married? If I do want those things, what do I want that life to look like? So I think it's all about being true to yourself and trusting yourself and knowing what you want. So if you're in a position where you just don't know, you're on the fence, I say wait. You have to wait. You have to figure it out. So sit with yourself, journal, take years. Don't make any quick decisions because, marriage may not be for life, but it can take your life in a completely different direction than you want it to go. And kids are for life. So these decisions can't be made lightly.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you said that too, even just especially about young women, because we always forget like your brain isn't even fully developed until you're 25. Like, I know we think we know what we're doing. We don't have our whole brain yet. Like, we don't even know who we as adults are yet. And so I love that you focus on encouraging them to travel and learn about themselves and just have that independence and become that fully formed adult version of themselves as an independent person before making a decision that attaches you to another person for, a lifelong commitment or children for that lifelong commitment when you're not even quite fully formed, quote unquote to say it, but like truly your brain is not fully formed yet.
Exactly. I remember being that age and you feel like an adult, but you're not like you're saying, like your brain is not fully formed and you truly don't know who you are. You're still figuring out who you are. So you shouldn't be making lifelong decisions in that time period. You should just be figuring it all out. And that's it.
Yeah. What do you say to women who, maybe they're a little bit older, maybe they're 32 and they don't have a partner and they're like, I don't know, but I also am running out of time if I do end up landing on the side of motherhood. Do you recommend that they freeze their eggs or like take steps to kind of preserve that option? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do think that's a good idea. And we've got the technology to do it. So why not do it? Yeah, if you don't have a partner, if you don't have the ideal situation that you know you'd want in order to have children, then yes, we've got the technology to do that, to enable you to have children in a few years if you so choose. But that buys you some time, absolutely. And in that time, if your eggs are frozen, you can figure out, okay, is this really what I want? If I don't find a partner that I think is suitable for raising children, do I want to do this on my own? Yeah, I love that it buys you time.
Hmm.
And even I mean, you could be 40, 45 years old and decide, yeah, I'm going to go for it. And I don't need a partner and I want a child and I can do that. And I can do that all on my own. And I love that freedom of choice for women. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things that we're up against is that feeling of running out of time. And I always joke with my husband and like people about this. It's like you don't have that clock in your
No.
head and that feeling like if you don't make a choice soon or if you don't line up all these steps that you want soon, that you won't be able to have it. And it just feels like this stress on women that we're burdened with thinking about trying to plan our life like 5 years out because it's like for a lot of women, they don't just maybe want kids, but if they have kids, oh, well, maybe they'd want to be married and they'd want to be married for about a year. And then, if they are, single, then they need a couple years to date that person. And it's
Yeah.
like when you do the work back, oh my God, it feels like you have no time at all.
Yeah, I know, because it can take years until you're actually in the position that you want to be. Yeah, that is terrifying, I think, for many women, and I feel for them. But there's also things like surrogacy, and there's also things like adoption and foster children and being the cool aunt. So I think there's so many options available to women now, in addition to freezing their eggs. And and you can become a mother at 45 nowadays,
hmm
which is such a wonderful thing. If that's what you want, go for it. I think in many ways, you're better positioned to be a mother at 45 or 40 or whatever age than you are at 25 or 28 or 30. You're
Totally.
probably more financially sound. You know who you are. You've had all those years to focus on you, and now you're in a better position to focus all your time and energy on your children.
hmm I even think with even just how the age of first child has gone up even in the last couple of decades. Like before my parents' generation, everyone was like 25, 26 when they had their kids. And my generation, is early 30s or
Yeah.
late 20s, but not even like no one I know. I don't know very many people who had children even in their late 20s. Like a lot of my friends were waiting even longer. And so that shift has even allowed for more financial stability, like
Yeah.
more understanding of who we are as people. Like some people have houses that they've already figured out and like they live with their partner in there. So there's so much more stability that's come with even just this increase in age with children that you could see if you waited even a little bit longer and you had the time or you froze your eggs or whatever choice you made, you'd have more opportunities to make that life a little bit more comfortable um, based on
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, of course, there's some cons to waiting until you're in your 40s, but still, if that's ultimately what you decide you want, then hey, I mean, I think the pros outweigh the cons if you know that's what you want, and it's worth it regardless.
hmm And I just so appreciate that there's, again, this conversation around choice and options. And you can choose to have kids, you can choose not to have kids, you can choose to adopt, you can choose to have a surrogate. Like child rearing or that lack thereof looks so, so different and can happen at across all of these different ages that we're talking about too. And so I just want to kind of re-anchor that this is all about choice and all about the ways that we can craft and curate a life that we want to live and isn't kind of pushed down our throats by other people. It's our decisions and what we want.
Exactly, that is exactly it. That's why I tell these stories so that women know they have choices and they can be intentional about what they want. They can plan what they want. They can do whatever they want, whether they have a partner or not, whether any conditions have been met. If all the conditions have been met, it doesn't matter. Like every step of the way, you have options and you have choice. And the more storytelling we do, the more we'll see the pros and the cons in each of those options.
If people could take one thing away from your page and your message, what would you want that to be? I know we've been kind of talking around it, but what would you say is your message?
I would love for everyone to have a more complete and realistic understanding of the experience of being a wife, a mother, and or a child-free by choice woman, and understanding that the good and the bad that are inherent in those roles are often not talked about, and those are very necessary to see and acknowledge in order to counter like the sugar-coated rainbow version that we've been force-fed our whole lives. So yeah, just a more complete and realistic understanding of the experiences of women in the roles of wife and mother, and also a willingness to talk and listen about to and about these experiences with the purpose of informing ourselves and making choices about our lives with intention. That's really, I think that's like the crux of what I'm trying to do and what I hope people take away from
Mm,
all of this.
I love that. I also know you get a lot of comments on your page from women of all ages, 40s, 50s, 60s, saying, "Hey, I'm out here. I made that choice and I don't regret it, just so you know." And I think sometimes people will say, "Oh, you think that now, but in 20 years' time, you'll feel a different regret. You'll feel the regret of not having children." And I love that there's people who make themselves known on your page that are not experiencing that regret that everyone kind of warns you of. What do you make of that when people say you're going to regret it later? So, it's like your page, we're focusing on avoiding regret of having children. What do you think of people who say you're going to regret not having children at another point in time?
I think it's one more way that they invalidate women in order to force them into motherhood. And there's so many women out there, like in my comments and in my messages, saying, I'm 50 years old, I'm 60 years old, I'm 70 years old. I didn't have kids and I don't regret it. And I received, let's say I've received 100 of those comments and messages, and I haven't received a single one from a woman saying, I regret not having children. But that's what society wants us to believe, is that we're going to have this horrible, awful regret in our later life, and we're going to die alone, and there's not going to be anybody to take care of us. That's such a common refrain. Like, who's going to take care of you
Hmm.
when you're old and dying? And, a common response to that is, first of all, we all die alone. Second of all, there, look at all the people in nursing homes who have children and their children aren't taking care of them. Their children aren't visiting them. So many people
Mm,
in these nursing homes have kids and their kids aren't there taking care of them. So having kids doesn't buy you like this comfortable life in old age. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to be taken care of. And quite frankly, it's a horribly selfish reason to have kids.
yeah. I've never understood people who say that as like the first
Yeah,
line of attack. Like, who's going to take care of you? It's like, is that really why
yeah,
would
that's
you
why you're
say?
having kids. I feel bad for your kids.
Yeah, that's such a bizarre one. But I mean, to be devil's advocate, do you believe there's people out there who do regret not having children?
Oh, I'm sure there are, definitely. They're just not talking to me. They're not messaging me. I'm sure there's people out there that if they could do it again, they would have kids, of course. I think there's regret. We experience regret in every area of life, in every decision possible. And so, of course, it stands to reason that some people are going to regret not having kids. But I don't think it's as many as society wants us to believe it is.
Hmm. I love that point you made about, when you're older and you're in that nursing home. I constantly just think, because men die sooner than women, typically, on average.
Yep.
The people who are going to be around you when you're old are other old ladies, like your
Yeah.
other old girlfriends.
Yes.
And like thinking about that just warms my heart a little bit. Like, of course, I'd hope my kids come and visit, but the idea or the notion that they are going to be the people that are around me all the time, they are the reason I get up in the morning. Like, no, typically your children will be out living their own lives too. And like they'll
Exactly.
integrate you maybe to a degree, but your day to day is gonna be those connections and those peers that are by you at the same age. And I think I'm excited to go to like a retirement home one day and just like have a bunch of girlfriends
A bunch
around
of
me.
girlfriends, yeah, and play cards.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You have a podcast coming out. I would love
Yeah.
to talk about it.
Okay, yeah, great. Yes, I do. It's called Call Her Daring. And on this podcast, it's kind of an extension of my TikTok channel. So I will be telling the regretful mother stories, but I'm going to get much deeper. Obviously, TikToks are a maximum of 10 minutes. So all I can really do is read those stories on TikTok. But on the podcast, I will be interviewing these women, some of these regretful mothers. And so we'll be able to go a lot deeper into their stories and really talk about their feelings of regret, why they feel regret, and kind of everything that led them to that experience. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so that'll be one of the topics that we talk about on that podcast. And then the rest, pretty much all of it's about being just radically honest about the female experience. So telling women's stories, talking to authors and experts, and some other topics that we're going to talk about is like decentering men. I think we'll touch on the 4B movement, child free by choice lifestyles, of course, things like medical misogyny and how the world has been built by men for men. So things like that. So yeah, super excited to launch that.
Oh my God, congratulations. And that sounds so interesting, so exciting. I'm so excited to listen.
Thank
And
you.
I think, oh my God, your last name is so perfect because it is so daring to share these stories and have those types of conversations. So, congratulations. I'm really, really excited for you. That sounds amazing.
Thank
And
you.
everyone should check it out. Call Her Daring in a
Yes.
couple of weeks' time.
Yes.
Where can people find more about you and get connected outside of, we've just heard about the podcast, but if people want to connect on TikTok or otherwise, where are you at?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok. That's probably the best place. And I'm at Kelley Daring. Kelley is with an EY. And also on TikTok will be Call Her Daring. So at Call Her Daring on TikTok. And so those are the two best places to find me for sure.
Amazing. Kelley, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this conversation was just so insightful, so amazing. We all have choice. I love that you are sharing these stories that other people are maybe a little scared to share. And I just applaud you for that. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.